also find that path for musicians not to have 3 or 4 other jobs. That you really can just be in the city of New Orleans and you can be a musician. We have so many amazing young people who are at our local schools and universities who are getting a music degree or are over at Loyola and working on, music industry positions and things like that. And we need to ensure that those opportunities are here so that they can stay right here in New Orleans. But the health insurance piece and having that access is key. I'm also concerned due to the fact you all know what you're seeing across the country and also in the state with how they're trying to eliminate opportunities for Medicaid. When I was in the state legislature, I fought hard to ensure that there was Medicaid expansion. John Bell Edwards, at the time when he was governor, I was one of the legislators he sent up to Washington, D.C. to figure out the best ways to do expansion. So that was a key major move here in the state of Louisiana. If we start to roll that back, as we're starting to see our state legislature try to do, that'll have a very direct impact on our musicians here in our city and really the people as a whole here in the city of New Orleans.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So something that you talked about is a great segue. Something that you talked about, and that's something that I also see a lot, is that housing is a very huge issue. We have musicians who can't afford to live in the neighborhoods that they grew up in because we're a very neighborhood-based culture. So what are some things that you are looking to do for to prevent the displacement of the creative community?
When it comes to affordable housing, there's several things. One, obviously we have to increase our stock. And you talked about Austin earlier. And one of the things that Austin did to increase its stock is they started to repurpose city-owned public buildings that the city was no longer utilizing. And they were able to work with third parties to create affordable units in some of these properties. We have a total opportunity to do that. I think we have about 80 building structures right now that the city owns that are not being utilized. And then we have like several hundred parcels of land that the city isn't utilizing. So to really be able to leverage those properties would be key. That's why I always keep talking about taking our city-owned parcels and turning those to the New Orleans Building Corporation, which is the group that handles complex real estate deals for the city of New Orleans, and have them really focus in on putting them back out to commerce with the priority of it being affordable housing. But then the other piece too is ensuring that we keep people housed. One of the major initiatives that I led, this was 2 or 3 years ago, and we continue to fund it to this day, is right to counsel regarding evictions. And this really started during COVID. Do you all remember all the evictions that were occurring during COVID? And during that time, unfortunately, many of the renters did not have the ability to hire attorneys. And so they were, after COVID ended, they were just getting kicked out of their apartments. So that is when the city council stepped up and started to provide funding so that everyone would have access to an attorney and be able to fight an eviction. And so continuing right to counsel from me and my administration is very important, even though, I saw the budget proposal for this upcoming session, and there's been a complete reduction in right to counsel, which as a city council member, I'm going to add the money back in. But the other piece, too, is the insurance. And I plan on having an office for insurance justice. And some people say, look, the city can't do anything about property insurance. Like, what are y'all going to do? It's like, well, actually, I think that we can do a lot. I think that we can do a lot when it comes to figuring out the right policies. Can we figure out a path to potentially do a type of property tax, partial tax abatement for anyone trying to get a fortified roof? What policies can we put together to have a real strategy to go to Baton Rouge around fortified roofs that could potentially not just help the city of New Orleans, but help us as a state, coordinating with other cities? That level of strategy in the state legislature has not happened due to the fact that we haven't had a strong intergovernmental affairs team to really put together a strong legislative package, work closely with our delegation and others, and be fully prepared with a strategy and bringing all of you all up to the Capitol to lobby for these things. That's what it takes to get things done, and that's what I'll do as mayor.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. We're going to end with a rapid fire. Okay. Favorite New Orleans music venue?
Oh, come on. You can't just put me on the spot like that.
Yep. Yep.
All right. Well, look, okay, this one, and I love the dewdrop. I love tips. I love them all. I love them all. DBA. I like them.
All right, one more. We're gonna end. What is your most memorable New Orleans musical experience? That one's a little easier. There we go.
I've had so many. Oh man, I've had many. I'm trying to think of the
Family
ones
friendly.
I was going to say. I'm trying to think of the
Family
ones
friendly.
I can tell. You know. Look, I'm just going to be honest. The most amazing music experience that I've had was actually something that my team planned for me, and it was a Musicians for Helena event that y'all had for me last week to celebrate my birthday, and it was Don Richard, Tanya Boyd Cannon, Partners in Crime, Kristen Diablo, Robin Barnes, and it was just, I mean, I felt it so deeply, and I just so appreciated musicians being there for me because, as they know, I've always been there for them, and I'll continue to be there for them as mayor.
Thank you. Can we get a round of applause? Thank you. We appreciate you, Councilmember Helena.
Thank y'all for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you for this important conversation. Thank y'all.
Thank you. All right, we're going to transition. Y'all still doing all right? Everybody good? Bathrooms are outside, 5 minutes, and we're going to transition to the next candidate. Two, two, two. Two, two, two. 1, 2. We're going to get started again in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Wrap that combo. All right. We are going to keep this thing rolling. I appreciate everybody again for being here. Appreciate that first round, getting this thing rolling. And we are going to keep it rolling, all right? So get your seat on in. Again, we're going to ask if you have, if you can, silence your cell phones. If you have to take a call, please step outside. Trying not to distract, you know. All right, so we are going to call up our next candidate, who is going to be Senator Royce Duplessis. Come on up, please. Welcome to the stage. All right, keep it going for him. Welcome, Senator, welcome. All right, we're going to start off with Tim.
So I want to start off talking a little bit about missed opportunities. You said the other day that too often our artists make their name here but go elsewhere to build sustainable careers, and that you intend to pursue a broader economic development strategy powered by real investment to position New Orleans as a hub for music production. What do you mean by a hub for music production, and why do you think it's important to develop our music industry economy?
Well, first of all, thank y'all for having me tonight. This is a beautiful crowd, great energy. I'm just happy to be here, proud to be at this wonderful facility. I think it starts with what you said at the beginning of your question, the number of people who've left, artists who've left who haven't stayed. I say often that New Orleans can no longer allow for its charm to be its curse, meaning that we rest on the fact that, oh, we're just New Orleans, right? We're the birthplace, right? You know, we have the soul. We have all the things. If it's not paying the bills, if it's not dealing with the business, then it's not going to work, right? So that's what I mean when the question being about missed opportunities and ensuring that we go beyond the feeling. And it's about understanding that we're always going to be New Orleans, but we won't always be New Orleans if we can't take that feeling and that fun, but also marry it with function and making sure the city is operating in the way that can sustain, not just attract.
Maybe let's take a little time travel here. So let's say it's, the year is, we're in the late 90s, early 2000s, and Master P is getting...
You were going to say Master P and Cash Money. Because when you said late, I was thinking the 99 and the 2000. Yeah. I'm just saying, I immediately went to Cash Money and No Limit.
Right. So
I mean, I'm just saying.
So, Master P, left and went to Baton Rouge. Cash Money, post Katrina, set up shop in Miami, weren't able to make it back. If you had been mayor at that time, what would be some of the conversations that you could have with them about getting them to reconsider?
Sure. So just to frame it properly, Master P started in Richmond, California. He came to New Orleans, and he didn't live here because I think that had more to do with just, you know, when you make it and you grew up in a neighborhood, still we're a big city name-wise, right? But we're still a small city, right? And when you've reached that level of success and fortune, and as they say, you know, you're a hood superstar at this point, you know, it's hard to live in that same community just because of some of the things you're trying to stay away from. So I think that was a large part of why P set up his operation in Baton Rouge. And I think in large part why Baby and Slim took it down to Miami. But what I would say is let's look at what Atlanta did, right? Atlanta, they seem to have had the formula of how they could grow a competitive music industry where their competing music artists didn't have to be rivals in the sense that, yeah, you can compete, but we can also grow and foster and build up new young talent in the city. I think that was the big missed opportunity for New Orleans hip-hop in particular, of how we had these two global rap labels to represent New Orleans in the best way, but we didn't seem to be able to reach back and pull up that young talent like Atlanta was able to do. I think in Atlanta, you know, you had like Patchwork Studios and other places where they were doing heavy recording there. So people would go to Atlanta to record LaFace Records and other successful record businesses that were really, they planted the flag there. And again, I mean, I wasn't part of any of their organizations, but huge missed opportunity. If we could have just, if I was mayor at the time, tried to find a way to say, look, y'all, let's sit down, let's figure out a way where we have the imprint and the actual recordings that happen in New Orleans, where we're attracting other people to come and record their music in New Orleans. And at the same time, we're giving an opportunity for that young talent in New Orleans to be bred up under these legends.
So let's talk about the next cash money. We recently had our governor veto a quality jobs initiative that sought to attract and keep music businesses in this state. What do you think the city can do in order to try and, from an incentive standpoint, take the place of some of the things that the governor vetoed?
Yeah, so currently working in the legislature, you know, I was really upset when I saw that bill get vetoed. Made no sense at all. It was everybody voted for it. It was common sense legislation, and you know, I think right now what we're seeing across the country, but certainly here in the state of Louisiana, New Orleans has to be creative in responding to things like we saw that took place on that, because our industry, the music industry in New Orleans, would have benefited from that. So we get creative. You know, we come up with our own incentive packages, and whatever we didn't get on the state level, we find a way to do it at the local level. And I think the beautiful thing about the city of New Orleans is that we generally agree on these issues. We're not having some of the same philosophical debates or fights that we're having along party lines. And this was a bipartisan bill, right? So still no good logic there. Even when I read the veto message, it didn't quite add up, because we see incentives given for a lot of other things and a whole lot of giveaway programs that don't benefit the population that they were supposed to or intended to benefit. So I think that's where cities like New Orleans have to lean in and come up with their own program that would have mirrored what we did at the state level.
So there is a thought that clustering music businesses together, clustering artists together, music production businesses together can help build a community. You see this happening in Memphis. You see it happening in London. You see it happening in Colorado. Is there an opportunity to centralize and incentivize the New Orleans music business and New Orleans music makers into something like a crosstown arts center in Memphis, which houses a number of different recording studios, but also music businesses, also houses artists at reduced rates, provides them with quality housing. Do you see an opportunity for that in New Orleans? And where might you do it? Is there a city-owned property that you think fits the bill?
Well, I see nothing but opportunity when I look at New Orleans. It's nothing but opportunity. So the answer is absolutely yes. What specific building? I work with the industry. I work with business leaders and music industry leaders to figure that out. But there are so many opportunities right here, right now, that are within our grasp. And before I go down the dangerous road of throwing a possible piece of property out there, there are some that come to mind that actually aren't very far from where I'm sitting at, where we're sitting at right now. Like really not far at all, right down the street.
Does it begin with an M and end in an auditorium?
But with that said, on the clustering front, I think that's some of what we saw in Atlanta. And again, Memphis, and I think some of that's happening and even in Nashville. But the mayor's office can be a leader and a convener of working with artists, working with label executives, working with real estate investors to rally and promote. That's what it takes. It's like really promoting the ecosystem at the end of the day. It won't all be relying upon city incentives and a city program as much as it will be about getting the temperature right and getting everybody to buy into the vision that, look, this is New Orleans, right? If we don't have the opportunity in New Orleans, then where do we have it? But we have to be serious about not just the music and not just the culture and the feeling, but also the business of the music and the business of the culture.
We made it pretty easy on filming in this state through a dedicated office at the city level, special permitting powers, strong state tax credits, which did not get vetoed. And I think a lot of us feel like music has never gotten the same treatment when it comes to permitting. Would you support a similar office in the Office of Economic Development that could look to fast-track permits for music festivals and other music events?
Yeah, so the film tax credits did get limited. They didn't get repealed as the threat was there, and it continues to be threatened. But yes, the answer is absolutely. So with respect to permitting for one-off events or annual festivals that we know are coming, I was talking to somebody the other day, a local vendor, someone who does great work. He has an idea for a new festival and is intimidated by the thought of what he will have to go through at City Hall to get this. And as a city that literally thrives on festivals, that doesn't connect. Where what we do festivals. That's what we do. But to not have a dedicated, streamlined program with predictability is something that we have to address with urgency. And I believe that is something that we can do if we take the time and we're thoughtful and we truly listen and center those who plan festivals on a large scale, but those who plan and want to execute festivals on a smaller scale that may not have all of the resources as, say, a jazz fest or some of the annual festivals that we're so known for, but some of the smaller festivals. So the answer is yes, absolutely, and it's something I think we have to do.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Ashley, to keep it going.
We're going. No. Okay. I just don't feel like pushing buttons. It felt more fun to comically change 3 microphones in a row. So I am turning our attention more to, I'm representing the Recording Academy and those who are making the music and culture. And so this is thinking about, as you already mentioned, making sure that we're no longer allowing for New Orleans charm to be its curse. You've already alluded to Atlanta in terms of its work in fostering young talent. And as we think about our own local cultural economy, we're generating nearly $2 billion a year, but the people that are creating that wealth, ranging from musicians and DJs and producers and culture bearers, they often struggle to survive. So my question for you is how your administration will reform our city funding structures and also looking towards our larger cultural economy so that our cultural workers can actually benefit economically and not symbolically.
So on the first part of the question, you spoke to something that really strikes at the heart of so many New Orleanians, how what we generate, what we create, be it through just culture and how people fall in love with the city of New Orleans, even through revenue, so much gets extracted from the city, but it doesn't get put back in the city. And this is historical. This just didn't happen yesterday. I was proud back in 2019. I got to the legislature in 2018. I was proud back in 2019 where we worked with the mayor's office, with the then governor. We all worked together with tourism and hospitality to increase the fair share that the city of New Orleans received for the tax dollars that we generate as a city to go back into the cultural economy as well as to infrastructure, sewage and water board specifically. But that fight is not over. We have to go back, and we got to push harder for an even higher increase in terms of revenue that we get back to the city, because that strikes at the heart of every New Orleanian knows and understands that we deserve more as a city in terms of what we generate. The second part of your question, I actually forgot. Can you repeat it?
It's okay. I'm really good at having ADHD rants. So I was asking how you would reform structures so that folks are actually benefiting. Yeah.
So that's one part from a large kind of wholesale restructuring. But one of the things that I believe you're working on based on what you just described to me is, look, intellectual property is a huge component of this, and helping artists ensure that their talent is protected, their work product is protected, so that they benefit for what they create. And I will be an advocate working with all nonprofits and whatever agencies are out there to ensure that artists are getting the proper education, the proper resources, to make sure that what they create is actually protected, because that's a huge issue as well. And I know that there are a lot of organizations that are working to do that. And then you go beyond that, which I think are just the basics that every New Orleanian deserves, not just artists, which is access to housing, access to health care, good transportation, safe streets that they can navigate and enjoy with their family. So providing just those basics that any mayor would be responsible, irrespective of a cultural economy, but just the basics of running a city, good, reliable water and sewage, like those things that they need to feel safe and comfortable in a city would be a primary responsibility, that if we get those things right and we just improve them, that'll also help benefit our artists.
Thank you so much. You've also mentioned in previous dialogues and various questionnaires you've received over the past few months that you would be convening a huge subsection of the cultural community. With that said, too often we find that there are out-of-town consultants that are being paid large sums of money to study our culture, while our local experts and culture bearers are not often compensated for their expertise. So how would you change these dynamics and ensure that local musicians, cultural organizations, and small businesses are prioritized in shaping policy and whenever the city hires outside consultants?
So we hear the stories, and this is not a new phenomenon. This is something that's been going on for quite a long time. It's like, how do we ensure that those who produce, create the culture are protected? But we don't want to commercialize it in such a way where you lose the authenticity and truly what makes the culture, which is that's something that has to be balanced. Look, I think about just my life and how I came about. So my grandfather, and I didn't learn this till much later. My grandfather, he had dementia way before he died. He was 94, but he never forgot how to second line, right? He was part of a group called the Original Square Deal in Treme, and I mean, young man, 14, 15, 16 years old, part of this cultural organization, and my uncle has been a member of the Black Men of Labor. And they never really went into it for money. But then it's like when you see their photographs and what they created being used in a way where it's like you feel like, wait a second, this is what I created here. So that's where I would go back to the intellectual property piece of it, and making sure we're working with attorneys and business people who make sure that we're putting the proper contracts in place, putting the proper deals in place. And I want to make sure that if there's a major event, major festival, that we ensure that no matter what the deal is, that there will be a guaranteed percentage minimum requirement that local cultural bearers are included. It has to be a requirement.
I'd I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what are key things that you would, like key performance indicators that show you that engaging the cultural community in these dialogues and conversations is working?
You got to be connected to the community. You got to know it, and you feel it, right? So you're talking about indicators. It's not always based upon receipts and numbers in black and white. And I believe in receipts. I believe in numbers in black and white. Let's be very clear about that. But being connected to the culture, and you got to. It's about proximity, and I think that you have to be someone who understands the language and who's really a part of it to know whether or not the culture is actually benefiting from it or the culture is continuing to be exploited and not benefiting from it. So to me, there's a quantitative aspect to it, but there's also a qualitative aspect in terms of measuring actual benefits. So, and that's just something that I don't know how you can manufacture or read it, but you have to center those, you have to listen to those who are truly part of the cultural community. And for somebody like myself, I don't believe that will require much because I believe that I'm an extension of it.
Thanks for that. And then my final question looks more at centralizing culture within City Hall. We know that we have the existence of our Office of Cultural Economy, our Office of Nighttime Economy, but things feel really disjointed right now. So I would love to understand, are you going to establish a centralized cultural office, or are you going to work with the existing structures and empower them to coordinate cultural policy across departments and serve as a true advocate for culture within City Hall?
So as I've said over these past 3 months since I've been on this campaign trail, I'm not here to reinvent the wheel. I'm here to get the wheel turning. Much of what's in City Hall is outdated. We have structures and systems in place. Let's take Public Works, for example. The way that it's structured is really more appropriate for the 1970s. It's true. I'm not disparaging anybody. You can hire the best and the brightest, but if they're working in a system that naturally creates silos, it's hard to function and operate in a system that's really outdated. So I'm not disparaging any individuals. I'm saying the systems and the way the departments are structured need to be modernized. As it relates to the office you just described, it's not necessarily about keeping it or getting rid of it. I have no reason to get rid of it. I have a desire and a mission to make it work more effectively and more efficient. That's what the next mayor needs to be focused on. So, and unfortunately, new administrations come in, and we've seen this historically at every level of government, not just locally, but we'll get rid of a program because the predecessor had it, and we don't have time for that. We need to figure out what's going wrong in the office and make it work better. And that's what I'm focused on doing, making the wheel turn. But so the answer is yes, I would want to keep it and just make it more effective.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to yield my time over to Nate Cameron.
All right. Thank you, Senator. I'm going to be asking questions from the MACNO local perspective. And this is a good, all right, we're back. And this is a good segue for what we're already talking about. What policies would you adopt to ensure that healthcare, mental health services, and emergency financial relief are accessible to the creative community of New Orleans?
So, yeah, those are important areas. And I believe that the policies that we adopt can be done in partnership with agencies and entities that actually provide those services. So let's just say healthcare, mental health, for example. We have organizations like LCMC, Ochsner, and others that provide services, whether it's St. Thomas Clinic. We need to strengthen those partnerships. They understand the value that our cultural community provides to the city of New Orleans, and we have to continue to keep them at the table and stay engaged, have them put resources on the table in addition to the city, and have programs that are specifically targeted to providing health care and mental health services to our cultural community. And look, there have been programs that have already done some of these things that we're talking about that should be lifted up as well. So again, not to necessarily reinvent the wheel, but to highlight the programs that are currently working effectively to provide housing, healthcare, and the other services that you mentioned, and just continue to push them. So those partnerships in today's world, where we know that we're facing a budget deficit, that's a real thing that we're going to have to work through. We're going to have to work with the philanthropic community, get them to pitch in. We're going to have to work with the business community. They're going to have to pitch in. And we work collectively to lift up those who actually make New Orleans what it is.
Thank you, thank you. A lot of the questions that I got from a lot of my brass band colleagues and community members, whether it be the young, up and coming brass band members that we work with, or some of the ones that are out now working, is they are always talking about how they feel targeted, and how at certain times when things like the Super Bowl come in town, they're hoisted up to be the representation of the city, but when that goes away, they're targeted and they're treated unfairly. So what can be done, or what would you do to ensure that enforcement doesn't disproportionately burden those small-scale culture workers and musicians?
I started at City Hall in 2006. I was 23 years old. I was the chief of staff to a New Orleans city councilman for this area, for District C. This was post-Katrina New Orleans. And we learned a lot during that time. And one of the things that we did, this was Councilman James Carter. We passed an ordinance. This was the Mardi Gras Indian Culture Ambassador. I forget the full name of the ordinance, but the whole idea was to create better relationships between the Mascan Indian community and the New Orleans Police Department, to make sure that they were properly respected. There was good communication systems in place. We know that a lot of these guys that play, guys and gals, everybody who plays in brass bands, I grew up with a lot of them. I know a lot of them personally. A lot of them I've hired for many events, and I hear the stories. And it really takes constant communication and following these issues. We saw what happened when there was the imposing of, or the potential to impose, insurance requirement on some of the trailers in the parades, in the second line parades. Being close, going back to being proximate to the issue, making sure we minimize those misunderstandings when they happen, minimizing those issues. And when it comes to targeting, that just can't happen. That's just unacceptable. And if there was a wrongdoing that was committed, we need to find out and address the issue. Whether it happened through local law enforcement, we're gonna get to the bottom of it and make sure that doesn't happen. But I think, again, it goes back to being proximate to the community, having the relationships with those who are who provide those services, who are members of those brass band organizations and clubs and bands, and they speak to me and I speak to them, and working with NOPD to ensure that whatever policy, if it was NOPD, when you talk about targeting, that's what you didn't specify in your question, but making sure that they're not targeted. But if there's a misunderstanding, we're going to find out what the misunderstanding was and get to the bottom of it.
Oh, thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right. Also, we see housing is an issue for a lot of our musicians being priced out of their own home neighborhoods. What is something that you can do to make sure that these creatives are not priced out and that they can stay home?
So I have a goal that over 10 years, the city of New Orleans can build and preserve 40,000 affordable units. Now, I say build and preserve. This doesn't mean we're going to go and build anything in New Orleans East, multifamily housing units. I'm talking about the fact that currently in the city of New Orleans, we have 20,000 vacant or blighted lots, and we have 20,000 vacant or blighted properties that need to be redeveloped and put back into commerce. There are roadblocks right now in the way, but I believe many of those roadblocks are going to begin to be addressed through the Housing Trust Fund that we just passed as a city. Right now, we're looking at about $14.6 million in the first year that's going to go towards developing affordable housing. We're going to leverage that money to do more deals, to be able to provide housing for musicians, for teachers, for first responders. But the other piece that we need to do, in addition to trying to move 40,000 units back on the market over the course of 10 years, is dealing with the issue of homeowners insurance. It's crushing us. If anybody's been looked at the work that I've been doing over the past 2 years, I've been in the legislature now going on 8 years, but I've been fighting really hard to deal with the issue of homeowners insurance in Baton Rouge. We have a fortified roof program that's moving in the right direction, but it's not going far enough. These grants are good, but the city needs to stand up its own program to offset the difference in the cost that it takes to get a fortified roof. So I want to have a supplemental program at the local level with the goal of getting 25% of roofs fortified in the city of New Orleans, which will help bring down insurance costs for everybody. And our musicians and our artists will benefit from that. So that's something that I've been laser focused on, and I will do it even more so in the mayor's office by helping standing up a program for housing. And then we look back at some of the other programs that have worked over the years. You know, there have been programs where there's been housing developments specifically for our artist community. We have to revisit that and re-implement those programs.
Thank you for that. All right, yes. Last question is a hot seat, fast cultural question. What's your most memorable New Orleans musical experience, or one of your most memorable New Orleans musical experiences?
Oh wow, that's a tough one. So I have to say, that is a very difficult question, but I was going to say it was when I went to a Tupac concert at the Superdome in '96, but no, that wasn't it. That wasn't it.
We're going to put a pin in that one. I want to hear about that.
Me and my wife, we used to be the Dragon's Den right there off Esplanade. It was late one night. So we used to go to like a lot of different places. We'd be at Mimi's, then we'd go to Dragon's Den. It was really late. And so, you know, we had just started hanging out, and it was a real special time. It was a special time at the Dragon's Den. Yeah, it was a whole lot going on that night.
Beautiful. Can we please show?
It was a beautiful night.
You don't have to go. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to take 5 minutes, mingle, talk, and then we'll be back with Councilman Oliver Thomas. minutes, people. It's, how we doing? We still doing all right? Still good? All right. Beautiful. All right. We're going to keep this train rolling. We're going to keep this train rolling. Yeah. Chugga, chugga, choo, choo. The, the crazy train. All right. So we're going to bring up our third candidate. Can we please show some love to Councilmember Oliver Thomas? Any moment now. One more time. There he is. There he is. Councilmember Oliver Thomas. How are you? Come on up. All right. Take a load off. Tim, we'll start with you.
So, Councilmember Thomas, Nashville has Music Row, and cities like Memphis and Chicago and even Fort Collins and London have all recognized that having music creators, businesses, and supporters in a centralized location leads to good things over time. It's a clustering strategy. Recently, in a response to a Gambit Q&A, you stated that too often investments are concentrated in a few blocks while neighborhoods across the city are left behind. Do you have a fundamentally different approach to this clustering strategy when it comes to music business development?
Yeah, but you cannot deal with that question unless you're ready to deal with the history of music in New Orleans. And as someone who grew up playing Little Liza Jane on the street corner, beating on cans. We've always had music in all parts of the city. But the entertainment and music in New Orleans was never about a business. It was about culture, and it was about entertainment. So I'm always surprised when people to take a look at New Orleans now and say, why don't we have a music industry, a cultural industry? That's not why we dance. That's not why we played. That's not why the greats came here, because of that. I would say our music industry is call and response. It's like a syncopath, right? And so it's a response to how we live. So as mayor, what I would like to do, especially since that's a question now, is so let's develop an industry around it. Let's not look at it as, hey, there's those black folk or those folk in the night ward or those indigenous folk that are just entertaining people. Let's start to educate them about the economic benefits and the business of music. So folk, I'm New Orleans for real, right? And so for me to understand, and that's where my family comes from, out of Indian culture. I'm the only elected official to be king of two second-line clubs. My mama used to tell me and my brother go second-line for them, for entertainment, for people. We have to develop a business industry around it. So when you talk about Nashville and other places that have taken advantage of the business of music, that's never what it was about here. So as mayor, for me, I'd like to see more cutting-edge workshops. I'd like to see more emphasis on school, where it's not just about being in a marching band, but looking at the history of how they, Trombone Shorty and my cousin William Booty and John, and how they spun off into the industry. And I think you start teaching that early. But if you're not from here, don't be surprised why we don't have a business industry, because we were just entertainment at one time. And that's what we did anyway. If there was no one to entertain, we entertained ourselves in the neighborhood.
You mentioned, I think your comment on education is pretty spot on. Would you support the development of an intellectual property curriculum that could be taught in the schools? And if so, how would you fund it and implement it?
The mayor's not in charge of the school system, but I want to have the first office of education as a mayor, where you could sit down with the superintendent and the school board and talk about how do you develop not only that, but a relationship where we could take advantage of other opportunities and other sectors for growth. And I think it starts with a conversation about what that looks like, but it starts with people in this room who understand the business side of it. I think too often we're looking for politicians to fix issues that are outside of their resume and outside of their realm of expertise. And I know a lot about stuff, but I'm smart enough to know I don't know everything. So I would be looking to the people in this room to say, hey, how do we create that economic foundation to educate people? And how do we sync it with the school system so that it becomes to be natural and sustainable?
So recently, our governor vetoed a quality music jobs program that sought to entice, but also entice businesses to come and locate it in the city or in the state, but also stay in the state. What do you think some opportunities for the city government are to entice music businesses to come to the city, or to keep the ones that we have here?
Well, first of all, you want to revisit that conversation with the governor and educate him, hopefully. You want to educate the New Orleans delegation, who has real political relationship with the governor. One of the interesting things about this race is that we don't need a predator from our state partner. We need a partner, right? And I'm going to throw this out there because no one really is thinking about it. If we lose a lot of our experience in the legislature, where does that expertise and those relationships come from to protect us with areas like this? Y'all better be thinking about that. It is a tough place for rookies to survive. But no, I would want to revisit with the governor and kind of maybe educate him. I don't think they really understand that a lot of it is ideological and political reaction, whereas I'm the kind of person that I don't mind you educating me and I'll educate you.
Are there tax incentive programs at the city level you think could be employed to attract more music businesses?
Other cities take a look at venues. How do they attach certain fees that'll go into cultural buckets to invest in that. I think we're at a point now that I think you take a look at all of that, especially given the fact that some of these large venues and some of these large events that are happening here, but that's going to have to be a conversation with our tourism leaders and our service leaders. Where does it come from?
So I think you talked about festivals, and I think a lot of us in the music business have looked at the streamlined approach that this city is dedicated to the film industry, whether it be a specialized permitting, or just fast tracking the development of audiovisual productions in the city. And I think in the music business, we've felt somewhat left out. Do you think that there's an opportunity to develop a film NOLA, a music NOLA office within the city government so that they can fast track music festivals and other music events to be held in the city?
I think there's been an opportunity since 18th and 19th century when New Orleans music went nuts around the world, when the Dixieland Brass Band in 1917 when they went viral, right? But that goes back to my first comment about we have to develop the thought leadership around that to talk about it as an industry, and it's a sustainable economic industry. That has never been how local people, that has never been how tourism industry or even the leaders in business, they've always looked at our culture and our entertainment as something extra. And right now, many of the young people who are gifted and folk who are gifted, they don't want to be extra, they want to be part of. So I think you have to revisit, how do we take a look at it? What is that relationship like from a public policy side, but also from a business side?
How do we change the mindset of...
Doing it right now?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Doing
I think the people in this room have the right mindset, and I think they're all looking for the next leader of this city to lead in that mindset.
This is the first time in my lifetime, as someone who's from it, right, and whose family is from it, that I've seen more people talk about how we benefit from it. And I don't want to say that it's part of even our ignorance if we're from here, but we never had a problem dancing for you, playing for you, performing for you, as long as we got a few coins and you got some joy. Well, I think now the time is over because we want you to get some joy, but we want some money now too.
I think that's right. I think we can all attest to that in this room.
Y'all definitely need to agree with that. Like a poetry show, you know?
What are some of the growth areas that you see, and this is my last question before I pass it off, what do you think the biggest opportunity for growth is in the music industry and the music economy?
Expanding the footprint, which I think everything has been delivered by the river, French Quarter, downtown, certain venues. But Ray Charles went to Rip Roberts and the Dewdrop Inn. Miss Mercedes down in the Lower Ninth Ward and the Little Room Boogie and the Hot Spot. There were venues too in the early 1900s in places where those black entertainers went to play before they came downtown. So why don't we revisit that? Because a lot of our talent comes from those neighborhoods anyway. And so let's revisit those communities.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Ashley, now.
Here I am. Oh, great. Thank you so much. So I am representing the Recording Academy, and of course, as a musician here in New Orleans, I really appreciated the acknowledgement that you just had that our city didn't start out expecting to be a music industry. Just starting with that caveat there. But we also have to acknowledge that our cultural economy has been generating nearly $2 billion a year. And we have so many musicians and folks that are creating that wealth, ranging from musicians or DJs, producers, culture bearers, often struggling to survive. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your administration will reform economic development, whether that be city funding or permitting systems, so that our cultural workers can really economically benefit.
I mean, the cultural grants were a step in the right direction, especially since we don't have an industry yet where it kind of helps feed off itself and sustains itself. I used to host a Good Morning show on WBOK, right? Well, I worked for an engineering and design firm for the 9 years, And by the way, I was out of office for 14 years. I've been elected 3 years, 9 months this time, and I came back to see a whole lot of stuff I didn't recognize. But I used to have Walter Harris, who's my cousin, on the show to talk about why don't musicians and artists have special parking places and spaces. Because if they get crossways with the city, then that parking ticket or paying to park could actually be most of what they made. Why aren't there special badges that allow them to move around and perform at different venues where you don't have city hustlers, right, harassing them? Why doesn't the city promote more events, especially fashion? And then while on the front end, one of the things that me and Walt used to talk about a lot was that it would be nice if that when the mayor met with Essence or met with a new festival or met with a new event, that someone from this community would be in that initial meeting on the front end to talk about how you create opportunity, because we have a lot of very successful events here where you may never ever see a local artist or a local band or local musicians. Especially and with conventions. Conventions, you know, some will bring 25, 30,000 people, and if there's a meeting on the front end, then you could determine who and how people participate.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think about how many festivals and events are outsourcing and bringing out outside talent when we have such a great wealth of resources here on the grounds.
Yeah, but that goes to part of what he said. As someone who worked in the movie industry, I was main character in Treme on HBO and did part of all of season 2, did 3, I did a little acting, you know. I wrote one of the city's most successful stage plays, sold out 13 straight nights. The movie industry is treated differently, as if they have a right, because of their union, to have their people participate on the front end. We need to take a look at all of the folk who represent the music industry the same way.
I really appreciate that note about making sure that musicians are represented in that same way. I know that you had mentioned in past questionnaires, in the many months of that you've gotten all these questionnaires about strengthening.
One of them,
yeah. Oh, that's a lot of them. That's a lot of questionnaires. You had mentioned strengthening the Office of Cultural Economy / Office of Nighttime Economy. And I'd love to understand a little bit more about how you would strengthen these departments to support music in particular, recognizing there is such a strong foothold in film.
Nothing against the people who worked in those areas, because that was a step in the right direction. When you hear me talk about a city that works for everyone, you know, I even have other people that adopted my slogan, right? But when I say that folk won't have a seat at the table, you're going to be part of building the new table, then I think when you talk about specialized efforts like this, you don't just have a politician who appoints some people because they have a political relationship. You have to be real specific about appointing some expertise, right? Industry knowledge, understanding what a cultural economy really is, not just a cultural office, and how does it sustain itself from one political regime to the next. So I think so much of what is specialized amongst this room that, you know, to me, you guys would hope and really be real aggressive in wanting to be part of transition, you know, wanting to be part of org or reorg. And I think that's how I would like to do it.
Thank you for that. I mean, I would also love to talk a little bit more. I mean, you just mentioned convening the cultural community, like really having us engaged in these processes. On like a slightly tangential front, I mean, too often we have out-of-town consultants that tend to be paid this really large sum of money to study the culture. And we have so much deep expertise that exists here where our culture bearers are rarely compensated for their expertise. So I'd love to know how you might change these dynamics and ensure that local musicians and culture bearers, small businesses, are all prioritized in shaping policy and whenever the city hires consultants.
You probably heard me speak about that. New Orleans is one of the few places, if you want to be an expert, all you got to do is say you're from out of town, right? And we'll give you a contract. And that has to do with, historically, the lack of sophistication in the fact there's a mindset here that is brilliant as we are in terms of our culture and our entertainment, and we are brilliant. There's a level of insecurity when you come to talk about the business aspect of it and the intellectual capacity in thought leadership about it. And it's here. There are a lot of seeds that are being planted here now that if y'all don't mess up, if y'all get the right mayor, the time is now where you're going to impact each one of those areas, right? And now we'd love to go back to 1917 when Dixieland bust out and created this craze, right? But we're here right now, and this is the opportunity right now. But yeah, we love out-of-towners here, and I love out-of-towners too, but I've said publicly, we didn't need nobody to come here, we didn't need anyone to come here to save us, because they usually didn't save where they were from. We just need people who want to come here and work with us and help us advance what we have.
Thank you. My final question is going to be regarding data. Beyond anecdotal, we really lack reliable data on musician pay. I mean, we've heard stories of musicians talking about making tip money or $100 on a gig. And we know that this also is a larger conversation around artist displacement, the true cost of sustaining culture here in New Orleans. So I'm wondering if you would commit funding to accurate, community-trusted cultural data on the cultural economy and measuring not just the revenue, but who really is benefiting from it, and subsequently how we would make this data public-facing.
Yeah, but I think given the level of sophistication now, and first of all, blessings to some of the out-of-towners who have adopted us in New Orleans, not because they want to change New Orleans, but because they love New Orleans. So I think you'll see, looking at events and we've been a pass-through for quite some time, right? I would be willing to sit down with any governor and say, hey, look, we won't ask you for a penny if you let us keep everything we generate in Orleans Parish. None of them ever wanted to fall for that. But we have an opportunity moving forward, especially if we become more sophisticated about the business part of it, where you're naturally going to participate. You're going to be on the front end of shaping what that looks like, and it'll be a whole new attitude and expectation. Some of the most brilliant musicians, and like some of them, my family members, they could always be negotiated down because they never got anything anyway. So I think the new mindset now is, no, you can't negotiate me down. And what did we just find out about the Super Bowl? The most successful Super Bowl in the history of Super Bowls, right? And nobody does it better than us. And we didn't make any money. So what do you have now is new negotiating points of view now, because the thought and the people are a little more sophisticated, and we're not just happy to have your event, we're happy when we can benefit from your event. And so I think that piece has started already.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Nate Cameron.
We on? I'll be asking questions from Macno, from a local musician standpoint. So it's a perfect segue because you mentioned the Super Bowl, and a lot of musicians I've talked to felt as though Super Bowl is a good example for how they got a lot of good opportunities from a lot of things that came from out of town, but that's not how they live normally, and they feel as though they were exploited and put on a pedestal to be seen then and then kind of discarded otherwise. And so we've seen the health of our musicians and our culture bearers decline in mass, mental health. So what policies and programs would you put into place to ensure that our creative community is taken care of?
Man, I would love to get in the room and talk about how musicians are part of creating their own festivals and their own opportunity, even if it's also to support a major event, right? Because what happens, if we're part of it and we're playing and we're entertaining, people are going to come from that event, but they come in and see what's going on with New Orleans musicians and New Orleans artists. So I think you're in an age now where not just negotiating on the front end with festivals for opportunity, but creating your own venues where you can determine how much you charge, how much you pay, and who's part of, from setting up the chairs to cleaning up to the engineering that has to go along with it. I think that those are the opportunities. Look, we're in an age of disaster capitalism, right? And that's how folk read Dr. Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, right? There's a group of people in the world now who have figured out how to do better while we do worse. And so that goes from market forces to capitalism to all facets of how we deal with money in the world today. So I think it's incumbent upon people, especially who have expertise, to start developing their own lanes and their own opportunities about how much of that market share, how much of that dollar that they grab and put in their pockets. That's the new world economy if you're going to survive.
Thank you for that. So one of the things also I think that we see is that housing has been a big issue for our musicians and our culture bearers. So what can be, I mean, we're in a housing crisis and certain sectors are hit harder. We know that musicians are one of those sectors. What would you do as mayor to combat that?
I would actually do a little of what was done before. When you study New Orleans population, 615,000 people in the early 60s to declining, white flight, political upheaval, the isms, 500, 400, 500,000. From 94 to about 2002 was one of the most successful periods when you talk about growth, right? Especially amongst your indigenous population, your largest population, African Americans. Home ownership went over 41% for the first time in a long time. Well, it wasn't rocket science. It were housing experts that worked with former Mayor Mark Moria to develop programs where folks had opportunities where city to city turned property into opportunity. And they didn't sit on their inventory. They worked with people like Ross Pacio and Lauren Anderson and Robert Thomas and others to say, hey, dispense of this, right? So now the city has numerous pieces of property. The school board's sitting on a bunch of property. Let's go back to that model, but with a 21st century spin at how we're looking at redefining what affordable housing is now. And that has to be in education. Affordable housing isn't like how I grew up or where we grew up. Affordable housing right now is that MBA, that young engineer, that law student, that person who has a job. But I think that's going to take an education and a partnership of combining what was with what is and unloading inventory that public bodies own so that they could be developed. And OTforus.com was my plan. I was the first person who talked about that. And my number was 10,000 would be an easy one to reach.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. So one of the questions that my young lions, my young brass band musicians often ask me, those that particularly play in the French Quarter, they feel as though the enforcement on them is different and that they're often targeted. But they're often seen as those that are pushing our culture forward, so they play an important role. What would you do to make sure that enforcement isn't unfair for them?
Yeah, but that's a problem, and I've spoken publicly about that. You know, New Orleans has always been a hustle economy, right? We've never had Wall Street, major markets, and when the oil companies collapsed and when they went to Houston and Texas, then we really had a hustle economy, right? The Frozen Cup lady up the street from me, where I grew up in the Lower Ninth Ward, she sent her kids to private school off Frozen Cup. The grill man at the second line, my little cousin, right, he was able to make enough money. So there are people who complain about that now. I think the next level of sophistication has to be is how do we not punish that person because they're not part of the mainstream economy? How do we permit them? Because the craziest thing in the world I see now is when we do a second line, and I was king of the Tremé Sidewalk Steppers, my wife was the queen. We had a second line, and you coming out giving parking tickets and giving people tickets, you know. But that's how, if I wouldn't have played ball in college, that's how I would have been able to go to school. And so I don't understand this move to punish that part of New Orleans economy because it's been around for 198 years.
Thank you for that. Last question is hot seat rapid fire. What is your favorite New Orleans musical experience, or one of?
Y'all not gonna believe this, but the New Orleans review that Hot Boy Ronald did a year ago over at the Jazz Market, it was fire. And it was a lot of New Orleans musicians that maybe people wouldn't know about. And, you know, it was one of the, I ask Ronald all the time, I say, man, why don't you do that again, right? Because if you don't know him, he's really a brilliant musician and really plays a lot of instruments. That was one of the most fire things. And it was packed, but most people didn't know about it. Yeah, like my auntie would say, I liked it that.
Thank you. We want to thank you for your time. We want to thank you for your answers. We appreciate you. Please let's show love to Councilmember Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. We appreciate you all for being here. Round of applause for everybody. One more time for the Jazz Fest for having us. Want to get a picture here? Yeah. Thank you. Thank y'all once again. We want to again thank our sponsors, the Louisiana Music Partners, the Recording Academy, Macno. Thank y'all.